Hi, Ryan here. Just decided to make this video about my latest track that I made and how it was created. So, for anybody that doesn't know, this is a song that me and my friend Canal made for Mr. Bill's November Community Challenge. We were essentially challenged to make a song using a provided sample that had to be a minute. If I'm remembering correctly, because it's been a couple of weeks since I did this, one of the big things about it was we were encouraged to be able to find the musicality in the sample itself and incorporate that into the track. So we tried our best, and I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But yeah, so we actually took it to a pretty strong level in how we use the sample. Everything that you see here was made with the sample and just the sample, with like the caveat being like sometimes it was put into like simpler here on Ableton. This was the provided sample. So, as you can hear, it seems to be, I don't know exactly how Bill did it, but it just sounds like a piece of sheet metal was essentially like waved in front of the microphone, kind of like how they do thunder effects on like stages for performances and stuff like that. And maybe some like tapping to get those like pitched percussion things, but at the end of the day, I'm not quite sure how he made the sample. So one of the first things upon hearing that was like, okay, we've got to start with percussion. And so one of the first things I did here was I resampled the original sample, which was clearly a stereo track, into a mono resampling, because I knew that some of the things I was going to do on the low ends, I didn't want too much low end being in stereo and it muddying up the mix too much. So I think what I started with was the bass kick. So I took cuts of each of the samples here and just ended up dragging them in. So you can kind of see here, it's like the first one I put like an auto filter on it and then threw an OTT on, just pretty stock, and then threw some erosion and dynamic tube to give it some character. You can hear like what it sounded like before just this sample. I think it's pitched down. Yeah, it's pitched down quite a bit to give it that. But then you can hear once everything is back on, it has a little bit more of that high end like clickiness that I wanted to give it some transient energy. So then I created a second layer for the kick as well, which focused a little bit more on the high end here. Again, used the OTT to kind of pull up some stuff. And then I also sent it through Isotope Trash here to just shred up the sound a bit, just to give it some more character. So that ended up sounding like this. So yeah, so like when it was all put together, we ended up getting this. So nice, like, low rumbly, but still with a bit of a transient kick. Then I essentially followed a similar process when I went to make the snares. You can see it's like this first one, we just kind of carved out the area where we wanted our snares to exist, gave it a little bit of resonance, around 150, gave it some saturation, OTT, erosion. Second one, kind of did the same thing I did on the kick drum, where we just carved out some of the attack transient parts and isolated them. Added things to give out, with the exception of we also added a bit of a chorus here to widen it out a bit. So then you can hear each of those samples. I think there was also some pitching on this too. Yeah, we pitched these down as well. And I think all four of these are different parts of the sample as well. So yeah, like the first kick, when you got nothing on it, or not the kick, the snare, versus when it's got it on. You can hear how it's got so much more of that, like a higher end, like shimmer to it. Makes it more aggressive. And then the lower snare here, take everything off of it. I think this was also sped up a bit as well. Oh, no, it wasn't sped up. It was just pitched up quite a bit compared to everything else, which would have been pitched down, just to get the snappiness out of it. And so then when we turned everything on, it just cleans it up a little bit. So then with all of that together on the snare, kind of gives it a industrial-esque feel. So then from there, I also knew there was one part of the sample that was pretty distinct in my eyes about how it sounded. And I knew I had to treat it somewhere. And so I ended up using it as like our tom sound. And I think these are just the samples chopped up to give them a little bit more rhythmic continuity here. So you can hear. I think there's some effects put on them to make them sound a little bit more powerful than they would have otherwise. Yeah, so that's the original. I think this, yeah, distortion, OTT, and just some delay reverb using Supermassive. Just gave it a little bit more life. And then the last drum piece, or dedicated drum piece, I should say, that I created was the hi-hats. So for these, I took a sample, sped it up a few times, and then resampled it again. And so when it's put in without the effects, it sounded like this. Versus when everything kind of came on. It just gets far more focused on that airy part. So you can see here we just did a little bit of EQing, so we were only getting things above like 2K. Here, added some erosion to add some noise, saturated it, threw in an OTT, threw in another EQ to really accentuate the high end above 10K. Threw in some reverb to make it feel like it was in a space. Put on a glue compressor to just kind of even it out across the thing, and then some reverb and then OTT again. Probably one of the more complicated transformations that went on here. So like, and then the other hi-hat down here is the same thing, just pitched up by a semitone. That way, when the hi-hats are playing, you kind of get this rhythm that rises up at times. Just so it didn't stay so stagnant, because what I didn't want the drums to feel too samey throughout the track, especially when it's only a minute long. So altogether, you kind of ended up getting, like in this section, in the build-up, so yeah, just kind of made the foundation for how we wanted to build the track. So then, next thing we knew that we needed was to build the bass. We started with this lead bass here, which I did this one by loading the full sample into Simpler and then essentially played around with a few of the different wave cycles until I found one I really liked. And then, so like you can hear what it sounds like with the MIDI envelope here, just to make it play different at different velocities. So that. Yeah. So it kind of, when it got higher there, it kind of ended up getting like an acid bass tone. And so just to make it kind of match the industrial vibes of the drums that we had here, threw on an OTT, distorted it using trash, then OTT'd it again. And then actually I think arguably one of the more significant effects that I did on this was adding this redux. So you can like hear what it sounds like without it in this section. So it's still pretty clean, but as soon as I put the redux on it to just bring down the sample rate and the bit rate, that's when it got that droniness. And then it also picked up some staticky kind of noises that I liked the character of that came from that. And then we just did some like EQing here, simple stuff, just to kind of clean up the sound, make it match with other things. And then I also have a few sub basses here, which followed a similar formula here. So we have this part of the sub, which took once again, just took a sample here. And I'll just undo the effects that were on it. Wasn't actually a whole lot going on this particular part of the sub. Versus once it had the effects on it. Just cleans it up a little bit. I also had the other sub on it, which, looking back, I think I accidentally misnamed them. But the similar thing, had some effects on it, namely the OTT, and this drive from SSL. So you can hear what things sounded like without it. You can tell it's much lower than the other. Which, again, I named it wrong. So with the effects on, it ended up sounding like this. So then, when all of those basses came together, we got this. Which just created a huge bass tone that ended up being like kind of the focal point of that part of the mix. So then like the next big thing section that we worked on was kind of this, called it the glitch break section by the end. So like we wanted a way to showcase more of the like inherent rhythmic nature of the original sample. So that's where this little bit came in. So I found like one section of the original sample that I really liked and sped it up to match the BPM of the track that I was doing, and then pitched it up. And it ended up creating a nice, cool rhythm here. And then I didn't really have to do much to it. I just added a bit of a resonator to have it resonate in the root note of the key I was on, and then gave it a little bit of drive and compression with the OTT and glue compressor, and then just a little bit of EQing later on for the mixing process. So we ended up getting, without those effects, versus with them. Yeah, so it kind of gave it like a weird like guitar string twang sound that I ended up really, really liking. So, and then we took kind of some other parts from the track. So we like have this like shred part here, which kind of follows a lot of the same things. So I could give it some resonance that I actually ended up automating to resonate to the notes of the rising parts or the falling parts in the track, just to match it, OTT, chorus, and then I vocoded it with one of the pads that we made, which I'll get to in a moment. But you ended up getting a before everything here just kind of sounds like, because it's just a sped up portion of the track that got pitched up, versus when everything's on it, kind of gave it a bit more like air that made it sound pretty sweet. Then we have this quote-unquote wiggle part here, which followed a similar method, where it was just taking part of the sample, trying to find the inherent like rhythm in it. So it's technically two parts of the sample that I just lined up. So you can hear it without the effects. Well, okay, other than that reverb and EQ here. But it's just, yeah, it's just one of the like more wobbly parts of the sample through the resonators, OTT, chorus on it. It just gave it some inherent pitch to it that made it fit in a little bit better. This lift part, pitched up sample through a frequency shifter, OTT, supermassive, and then just an EQ later on. get a sample that sounds like this. By the time everything is done, would have sounded like this originally. So you can just tell it. It's like, just didn't have much space there compared to the later thing. And then this little hammer ring is what I ended up calling it part. It's just again a pitched up part of the sample through an EQ, resonator, OTT, glue compressor, some reverb. Would have sounded like this originally once everything was on it. Just gave it a little bit more power and life. Oh wait, hold on, both of them are on, so I'd have to turn it off on both of them to hear what the original sounded like. Yeah, so that's what the original would have sounded like compared to what it finalized to. And then lastly, in the glitch section, we included the, at least in the rhythmic part of it, like this little wipe kind of thing that kind of plays off of the snare here. Once again, this is just a straight part of the sample that was just turned down a little bit through an OTT resonator on it. This is one of the samples that didn't need too much playing around with. Yeah, so it just kind of gave it some presence, and so when it got coupled with the snare in this section, it just made it sound real powerful. So then some of the other parts, after we kind of created all those rhythmic sections, we know we wanted to kind of have like a lead-in part, something that was lighter to give some contrast to the really heavy vibes that came later, almost something icy. That's why we ended up having something called the icy pad here. So just threw the entire sample into MIDI, grabbed a part of the waveform we liked, threw some chorus on it, some reverb, threw it into vinyl to actually give it some the crackle and to make it sound like it was older. So you can see I actually like turned it back so it was like 1930s style recording, just to kind of kill off some of the lower tones. So you end up getting this dust sound that kind of prevails throughout the track whenever it's on. So with all of that off and playing, yeah, you just get a kind of clean tone, versus when everything's on, it widens it out, and then the frequency shifter is just to lead it into the next part. That was one of the little tricks we added when transitioning from different parts, is we either would take one of the major parts and like pitch it up as we were going, or pitch it down if it was bringing down the energy. So that kind of ended up being the background for these bell noises we made. So kind of like the way I did the bass and the pads, we took a cycle here that we, this is the most simple one too. It's barely anything. Just took it there, put it on a menu envelope, tuned it, added a glue compressor, supermassive, and then did it in just very simple, and then it's in 2 octaves here, just to kind of make it feel a bit more full. Just makes it sound bigger, more full, less tinny. And so then all together in that beginning section, you just end up getting that. Yeah, it ends up just being pretty relaxing, with the exception of that end where it starts to build up the thing. That's when we also decided to add a noise rise. And this noise rise was created by actually taking the hi-hat bit that we created here, basically throw a huge reverb on it, and then basically did the preverb trick to just get a noise riser out of it. Yeah, so we use that in a couple of the sections just to build up some of the tension. We also created this noisier pad that wasn't as clean as that beginning pad to get used in some of the more rhythmic sections. Has some stuff like some OTT, chorus, erosion, dynamic tubes, a lot of distortion on it. So it's like you can hear what it is without any of the effects on it. Pretty abrasive and loud versus when we threw the effects on it. Still really like abrasive, but less dominating of the sound. So it just ended up kind of filling out the space in that section. And then we let it like rise in that pitch that you heard to just build the tension going into the glitch break. And then we ended up using it in the glitch break here along with another pad, which was created in a similar way to the other pads and everything. So like you can hear it here. It's mostly just there to kind of help underline the noisy pad, just give it a little bit more pitch. And then you can see like the bell part exists up here. And we actually ended up having to put it into its own subgroup here because I'm actually using the bells in the shred section to give them the pitch through the vocoder. But I didn't actually want them to like dominate because I only wanted the bells to show up at the beginning and the end samples. That way they didn't overstay their welcome and change the vibe of that section too much. So then they come back at the end, but the trick is it's playing the same melody it did before, but we also, just to give it a bit more texture, added some like glitching sounds. And we did this first one by just taking a pad, doing much of the same stuff that we did before, but when we threw like hysteresis, fracture, stutter edit, a few different tracks of it, and a vocoder on it that was vocoded with this here, which is just the original sample sped up to fit in that section and then pitched real high. So you can actually hear what that sounds like. Yeah. Obviously got some utility and some frequency shifting and like a little bit of the like delay reverb just to give it a little bit more space. But you can hear it with the pad. Just does a similar thing. Get them both in there. Yeah. And they just lie low enough in the mix that they just create some texture at the end. That way it feels a little bit different than everything that came before. So yeah, that's kind of how we ended up making it. It's everything that's there. It was a really fun challenge to do. and I cannot wait to see what the next challenge that might pops up will be, because I really did have a fun time making this. So did Canal. But yeah, if you go ahead and check it out on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music where it's out, I hope you enjoy it.